Hey, Chris, it is great to see you.
It's good to see you as well. Yes, really good to be with you.
So, there's so many things that I want to talk with you about today. I just wanted to start in the spirit of the faith and arts conversations, just asking you to say a little bit about your background in faith and art and how those come together for you.
Oh, thanks. That's a great question. I am in the generation of PK kids, and sort of off branch. I think we call ourselves non-denominational, but it has flavors of AME, African American Episcopal Church, and flavors of Baptist. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, in the South. And in terms of art making, I imagine myself a choreographer or maker of art through and with the body. Um, and in just broad strokes, I both experience worship and prayer and devotion in the body. And I experience dance in the body, through the body. And perhaps the body is my primary form of meaning making. And so they're intrinsically connected. Phenomenologically speaking, or lived experience seems to call both of them together for me. They're often one and the same.
Well, I'm curious. So oftentimes, the Christian tradition is described as kind of body denying, but it sounds like for you, the body and faith are really closely tied. Could you say a little bit more about that? I'm wondering, even in terms of your experiences growing up as a PK, if there were certain parts of your community, your church community, that was expressed in, or if it's something you brought to it as an artist.
I think I think it's, and theologically, I think there a challenge could be resituated. I think the interpretation of the Christian tradition in parts of the U.S. feel to want to separate the mind and the body and the spirit and the body. But I'm pulled back to the moments where a woman touches the hem of Christ's garment and is made whole. I'm brought back to the word being flesh, to God in flesh, and it can only seem to only happen or be mediated through our bodies, as the primary way in which we understand or which we experience the divine. And in terms of my upbringing, it's fairly charismatic, and so people fall out in the spirit. They catch the spirit. They speak in tongues. I don't particularly participate in. I don't particularly participate in those parts of the tradition necessarily, but I do feel the spirit. For instance, I can't imagine hearing Aretha Franklin's "Precious Memories" with James Cleveland and not feel something inside of me yearn. And I think when considering connections between, I guess when considering connections between bodies per se, I think it's more about the regulation of what people should be doing or not doing with their bodies, like a kind of body theology that regulates itself, and much less a an outright casting down of the body as a product of experience. And there's something else, having studied in Britain, there's something else about an African American, not to make overgeneralize, but an African American experience of the ever-present God. This sense that because of particular struggles and impressions, it feels as if God needs to be here right now, and not a sort of abstract idea of God. If that is at all clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking there even, I guess kind of in the world of academic theology, the assumption is that it's kind of a book-based tradition, and it's about these propositional statements, but there is so much more to Christianity. So when you mention kind of your charismatic upbringing, and even just the ways in which all sorts of folks, I'm situated here in North Carolina, and white, I mean, the church is definitely segregated, but there's a lot of liveliness in the white churches as well as the Black churches, that I think often gets lost in kind of the academic space, where it is, like you're saying, kind of about beliefs. But there is a lot more happening. So that definitely resonates with me. I'm wondering then also if you can say a little bit about dance. In my mind, I think on the one hand, especially the kind of praise movement and kind of dance, I see, so when we're talking about lived experience, that makes sense. But also in my mind, I think, gosh, dance is also often kind of like the outlawed activity. So could you say a little bit more about that, about being a dancer?
Yeah, I think that I like to tackle the outlaw activity first, and I work my way back. I think there's a kind of connection between dance and sexuality that is present there, and the physical use of the body, and to offer a broader scope of performance studies, a relatively new field, looks at ritual, looks at sex, looks at sports as all ways of having and being in a kind of performance. And when I'm importing dance into that conversation, the easiest tagline I can go to is Alvin Ailey's Revelations, one of the most beautiful and beloved American modern dance companies. Has a work called A Revelation, and it's sort of an anthropological excerpt of Black church gestures or Black movements correlated from Black church onto the concert stage. And in terms of dance as well, as there's what we'll call dance spirituals. Martha Graham has made dance spirituals, Taylor Beatty has made dance spirituals. It actually is at the core of American modern dance. And so there's an element of the spiritual being a part of modern dance, less so in other particular idioms and genres. But I can't pull away from the sense that even if people or academics or theorists don't want to name it, there is a sense of spirit in dance. And I'm particularly working these days with the Cunningham technique, Merce Cunningham, avant-garde choreographer, and it's the most difficult, impossible technique to do. And I come up against failure over and over again, the ability to be able to lift your leg or twist your spine against the counterweight of your body. And it's a meditative practice of what to do when risk, faith, and the limits of the body are tested. And so I find dance to be ever enlightening, and without being overlaying it, a revelation about my own spiritual practices. So not only is that, I think it's a challenge to what we might think of as American modern dance or contemporary dance. I also think there's something else about using the body that is said to be in the image of God, and moving somehow in the image of God, with God, in concert. I hope that wasn't too...
that was lovely. I guess that was very, I guess, inspiring to my own sense of faith. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing just to share any moments where you've felt that revelation, or that kind of being in the image of God, or imaging God in your performance, or in just watching performances, if there's any that especially stand out to you, or just if you could maybe say a little bit more about that experience itself.
Yeah, of course. So there is often something called a tilt, for instance, and there are moments where on a particular line of the body, and you're in a deep contraction of the body, I feel just inherently in a movement, I feel something come up out of me in a kind of in a kind of way that isn't easily describable and saying, oh, I feel God. No, but it's like I feel the limits of my body, and it resonates, it resounds, to just offer something practical. It resounds. And then when you're doing a pirouette, for instance, onto a few millimeters of skin with impossibility, it's definitely a faith practice, something that is not seen, but definitely hoped for, and a risk, and a giving into the spirit, at least how I describe it. And there are moments where I'm humbled. There are moments where in an aging body that's not 20, I don't have the range I had at 20, where I'm having to renegotiate and come back to, in a sense of devotion, come back to what about this still speaks to the inner core of me. And the humanness and the frailty of this body. And inside of also the frailty is the possibility for wonder, is the possibility for something that I wasn't looking for to also emerge. Through failure, through the inability to do a particular sets of gestures or a particular impossible moves, something in that speaks to a kind of, without being too whatever that means, but a sense of like, I can do all things somehow it's present, it's ever present, even if at this moment I can't access it.
I love that. Even just that reflection on mortality and kind of the aging body, it sounds like there's maybe still, I guess in my own mind, I think of those heroic moments of the 20-year-old or the star athlete kind of in the height of their body's abilities. There is something kind of spiritual that resonates there in my mind, but it also sounds like for you, different moments through your life as you've gone beyond 20, there's new kind of richness to pull out.
And to add, I think I thought I knew God in my 20s, or I did know God from my 20s, and the way that I saw her as ever present in my 20s is way different now in my 30s. I'm like, I really see you. I see you. I have a longer, I have more material. I have more archive to have seen you present at work in my life. And I see the moments where I fail to live up to the ideals that I think are being called forth from particular sacred texts and from the embodied Christ. There are moments where now I can say, "Ooh, you really failed there." Where in my 20s, I didn't have as much archive. If that makes any sense.
Oh, that does make sense, and it also, I guess, kind of calls to my mind this concept that you have in your theological work of the kinesthetic hermeneutics. So using your body to interpret, and specifically biblical texts. I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more to all of us about what that kinesthetic hermeneutic is and how you might use it.
Right. So I think I made it up. And so I've been trying to make it real. So thanks for this opportunity. I've been trying to make it real. And I think I like to talk about ways in which it doesn't work, or it works, but not fully, or not in a good way. I think of the Westboro Baptist Church, or I think of the Ku Klux Klan, that the burning of religious iconography, like the cross, or signs that says God hates fags and God hates Jews. Those are physical enactments, or at the very least visual enactments of faith beliefs that are held. And in terms of the Ku Klux Klan, it's the absence of the body and the presence of the burning cross that inspires fear. You don't actually need to see an individual. And in terms of Westboro Baptist Church, it's their protest practices. And in some ways, they're better funded than most dance companies, in that if you touch them, you're involved in their performance. If you ignore them, they stay. they pull you into their performance, and in some ways, they have a clear plan. So it's a theater troupe somehow masquerading as a religious group. And so from their own bodies, they are giving a particular reading of the text, which isn't radically different, in theory, not in practice, from mainland Christian ideas about homosexuality, for instance. They are actually quite aligned. The difference is the embodied belief, how they're using their bodies in time. At least probably a turn would be Adrian Howes, performance artist Adrian Howes, who's passed now, UK performance artist. He had a practice of washing feet, and he would just wash people's feet. And there's something to be said for having the idea about humility that's gained from a foot washing. And then there's something else about washing someone's feet as the practical experience. And the best way I can to try to like change the gaze of that a little bit is to say, you might know about gravity, inertia, all sorts of things that are involved in making objects move, but none of that theoretical material actually helps you ride a bike. You only getting on the bike and falling and developing your proprioceptors helps you ride the bike. And in the same way, only practice helps uncover deeper meanings about what has the possibility of uncovering deeper meanings of how scripture or sacred text might be used by actually doing the practice. And so kinesthetic hermeneutic for me feels to be about like, what do we know from practice about what scripture seems to be highlighting or sacred texts are highlighting, rather than imagining that it's only happening here, but that the cross line between our heads and our hearts is enactment, is our physical enactment of belief.
Absolutely. It reminds me of John Salier's, the theologian of worship, has described kind of the greatest divisions in the churches you can see enacted in people's bodies. So like you mentioned, there are a lot of Christian communities that have kind of a statement against homosexuality. And then there's the enactment, and the ways that the enactment at the Westboro Baptist Church comes out, I think calls some people who maybe hold those propositional claims to wait a second, that's not what I mean, in ways that are frightening, but also I think helpful, because it's easy to hold a belief and not realize that it really affects people's lives.
And to be called into question about it, that belief, right? And to say like, oh, I'm not them, or they're let's scapegoat them for what they're doing. But actually to theoretically, in some ways, we could be aligned with that kind of like oppressive and divisive practices. And it may seem as if they're on the fringe, but actually their theology is right in some ways is in the center, is not on the fringe. And so I think often I'm trying to convince students and anyone who will listen to me, which is often not students, but anyone who will listen to me, is this sense of dance in its expanded conditions, or dance having the ability not only simply the abstract arrangements of bodies in space, but is a kind of choreographic thinking to say, like, what is moving bodies telling me now about this particular cultural situation? And because I have a deep interest in theology and in the Bible as I understand the text, it's full of stories of movement. People are crossing Red Seas. People are being healed from touching. Sicknesses are being driven out. Fig trees are withering. People are crying blood. Like all sorts of like embodied moments that feel as if it's impossible not to consider an expanded condition, and to realize that in certain particular moments, writing and literacy was not primary, and that these stories would have been heard orally, and they would have been performed orally for communities. the performance seems to, for me, be at the center of a particular of Christianity as I understand it.
So on that, I guess, piece of just reflecting on different scriptures, I know we all have our favorite passages and the ones where we're like, yes, this is the one I go back to. I'm wondering if you would just share some of those passages for yourself, the passages that speak to you, or that you see that kind of, I guess, kinesthetic being performed in a way that either gives you hope or, I don't know, is especially powerful for you.
Micah 6:8 jumps out immediately. O mortal, you know what the Lord does require of thee, but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Nowhere is it thinking or considering or discerning. It is a do, a walking, a being. Its verbiage even cries out for action. And Ezekiel 37 as well. Well, Lord, you would know, can these dead bones live? Can these dead bones live? And skin is rattled around them, and immediately the body is in some ways resurrected from dust, from exile, from oppression, from being beat down. They rattle and then they rise. That feels to be, for me, to be very, also very affirming. And now, having lived through in my own queer body, and my own queer and Black body, Master, carest thou not that we perish? Like this sense of, don't you care that I might perish? And this sense of, how could you lie here asleep? How could you physically be sleeping? Get up. The world is a mess. Do something about, do something. And this sense of telling a peace be still even feels as if it's the slowing down of action. And so all of those particular excerpts from how I'm reading the sacred text feels incredibly kinesthetic. I have one more. The angel comes down to tell Mary, comes down to invite Mary to agree to having, to bearing the Christ child. And even in that moment, she has to offer God consent. She has to offer her consent. Let it be as you say. That even if God has to ask consent, then how much more do we then have to ask consent? Or how precious is consent then? I'm thinking particularly around sexual misconduct. How much more precious then is consent if even God himself has to ask for consent? So, and all of that spraying, it feels to me to be very embodied and from the body.
Absolutely. On the Ezekiel passage, I know that that's a passage and something that you've done some recent work on in kind of considerations of performing, living Blackness in America. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what it is to perform Blackness, but also kind of the testimony. In one of the recent articles, you describe that move to testimony, and it just felt very resonant and important. Look, this isn't just about kind of theorizing, but it's about performing this testimony as a resistance, but also an offering of hope. I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, there's been a sense of that I somehow think the conversation around race in America particularly falls on on a particular paradigm between justice and injustice, when really I think it's inclusion and citizenship. And the way I sort of found my way to that is I'm thinking about Acts and Paul declaring, "I am a Roman citizen," civis Romus sum, and the connection between that and the sanitation worker strikes and the civil rights movement. I am a man. Not totally unproblematic, but this sense of reinscribing humanity, of asking for something that is already to be reinscribed and seen. And so it became clear to me in my own meditations on the text, where it's possible that police officers in contemporary North America do not fear what the centurions in Acts fear, which is social and legal retribution, is a retribution from harming a citizen. And in fact, what if the police officers and others are reading the performance of Black bodies in distress correctly, and that they aren't worth very much? Classic theorist Sarah Bond's work, Investigating Infamy, talks about particular bodies, depending on their job or their location or whether their proximity to Rome, inability to protect themselves, to protect their bodies, their actual personhoods from pain and hurt, or from they're legally vulnerable in court or legally vulnerable in the street. And in fact, crucifixion is only reserved for criminals and those who are not citizens of Rome. So this sense of countless Black bodies that have been piling up because of police brutality, I can't help but look back and say there's something about declaring citizenship or absence of social citizenship, never mind legal citizenship, that makes me come back to this sense of this is about belonging. This is about seeing value in bodies, and probably also about other sort of critical race theorists things, but also about citizenship. And in this, I go back to Genesis, where God, she's responding and she says, I hear your brother's blood crying out to me from the ground. The sense that even if the body is gone, even when the body is absent, there's something present that is testifying in absentia of the body. And I think about Trayvon Martin, I think about others, and I think, what must God be hearing from the ground? And in fact, I think it was Zona Hurston that said, if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So this sense of letting the loss and the absence speak, both speak to God, speak to her, and then also speak to humanity and speak to citizenship.
So where are you finding hope these days?
I think I find hope in my students. So I teach at the University of Iowa, and for many of my students who are coming from rural places, I'm the first person of my embodiment that they're meeting, and that is a lot. I'm a lot for some students, and I find that the ability for students to be able to hear me in certain instances and to be able to recognize my humanity and my leadership as a teacher, facilitator, and to see them change their ideas in their minds, or have a more nuanced understanding of American race politics, having grown up in small rural communities in Iowa, gives me a whole lot of hope. And even though I'm a generation in between, the sense from the civil rights movement and sort of performances and sort of protest practices that work then don't work now, and this sense that Black Lives Matter has no leader and that it's simply nebulous in its activities, but somehow is managing to do things that could not have been done many years ago. And so there's a sense that I'm finding that there is a sense of upswelling of hope. And sometimes I think darkness or exile makes visible things that were intending not to be seen as visible. And I'm going to be brave and say, I think like white supremacy we were just a few years ago during Barack Obama's presidency having a term called post-racial America. That was actually a term used, like thrown left and right. And somehow I have not heard that term used in a very long time. And somehow the resurrection or the zombiness of white nationalism and white supremacy has made itself visible in ways in which I think it had intended to be hidden. And so I have hope even that our bodies betray our intentions, or that bodies betray thoughts sometimes and speak or collect themselves around ideas that we had once thought were done. So all of those seem to be pretty hopeful to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously a lot of things to resist, but there's also things to hope for. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being part of these conversations. It's been amazing to hear about your faith and your art, and we definitely look forward to your virtual performance as well coming up.
Can I also say thank you for such a deep in investigating and thinking through things that I've written and thought of. And I just want to say thank you for being in community with me. Thank you so very much.